and welcome to the Other World podcast. I'm Fiona Weatherhead, and this is Denny Renault. Hi,
Hi,
Denny.
Dee. It's been so long. It feels like it's been so long since we've been doing.
I know it has, and and we've been sitting in these interesting energies we've been talking about. But today, I think we just want to welcome people into a conversation about things otherworldly, weird and wonderful, and what's going on with us and why we've been sitting in this interesting place of not podcasting for a while, and what's been coming up, I think, for us both on our individual journeys and the deep sort of clarity and awareness that's come out of this journey. So I think I'd love to invite you, Denny, to sort of speak to that, to just yeah, I guess to introduce the podcast today, to speak to what's been happening for you over this time since September when we last put out a podcast.
Yeah, and I mean, man, we're sitting right in it at the moment. We're in between two eclipses, which is just such a time of deep transformation. But the fact that we're in the first eclipse was in Scorpio, and Scorpio is the depths. Like, if everyone is feeling a little bit like they're in a soup at the moment or in a washing machine, then that's kind of what the energy is like right now. And I think that this is a culmination of a very, very long cycle, probably from like beginning of 2020 and COVID, and it's all kind of culminating at this time. And I think that since we've last spoken, I've been feeling a lot of that, just the real questioning of where I want to put my time and what I want to be doing, and just actually really big, deep questions, and that's just been sitting there in the background. So it's kind of interesting that we paused our podcast, and that this is the day that we chose to start it again, right between these two massive energies. So look, there's so much to talk about. I kind of don't even know which bit to go into. So I'm just going to throw it back to you right now. Where are you?
Well, yes, I agree with everything you said. It's just been such an interesting time. I mean, on a personal level, and also what I've noticed collectively, and what I've been, I guess, intuiting and being guided through the Akasha with. And I'd certainly agree with that perception of, this energy that we're sitting in at the moment goes right back to the start of the shift in paradigm. And it's an intrinsic part of that. And the way that I've been shown it, just as a general thing, and then I'll go into my personal perspective around it. The way I've been shown it is that we've been sitting in this liminal space between the I am and the we are for about 4 or 5 months now. It's been pretty intense, this energy. Whenever we go into a liminal space, whether that's at a personal level, which we often do after or before a big shift, but we've been sitting in this collectively. And what it was shown to me was that we needed space between that journey we've been on since the beginning of the shift, which has been a very deep I am journey, diving deep within ourselves, getting that awareness, that clarity, that understanding around our truth, and balancing that out and bringing ourselves into the space of stepping into who we really are. And we've needed some space between that journey and the journey of the we are, the reconnection, as we bring that new version of ourselves back into connection with each other, back into the collective, because it's the way that we step into that journey that is going to shift us again in the paradigm that we're moving through at the moment. And it needs to be so different. It is vastly different from how it was before we went into this energy. And so therefore we've needed this kind of adjustment space, this liminal space, to actually assimilate and integrate everything that we've gone through, and also to keep finding the clarity, like you were saying, of focusing on where it is you want to be going and where you want to be sending your energy, and being really clear about that so we can attract it in. So I've been aware of that at a collective level, And then I've been looking and observing at myself in that space and what's been happening for me. And this has been a time of becoming absolutely clear about what I want to be doing for the next 20 years, and then taking action steps around that, which has really involved for me personally renovating my house to get it up for sale, and making this major move, to the other end of the state, and and completely changing my life. So it's been huge. It's been a big time. And we luckily, thank goodness, I'm so grateful for the connection that we've still had through that, because it's been a bit of an interesting disconnection from a lot of people that I know. So we've had many conversations around this as we've both been moving through this time, and we've been moving through it differently, but we've been moving through it together, as we all have in our own individual ways. So I think it's just been massive, and we weren't aware of how massive it was going to be until we were right in the middle of it, right in the thick of it. Yeah, just that little thing.
Just that little piece. It's funny, as you're speaking, I think about the two of us, and when we began creating together, and when we very first began, we started under the name Maven and Maven Woman, and that felt like this energy that really wanted to come through. And we created and went on retreats under that name. And I think it was then, just before COVID, that we changed our name to Liminality. And we talked about the liminal space that we were going through, which we said at the time is going to be like a decade. It's not going to be a year. It's going to be this period of time that feels like this the unseen, the just sitting in the not knowing. And then we went into COVID, and we took our first group out to Uluru under Liminality. And then coming back from that trip, we then decided that it was the other world. And that, as soon as we changed to that name, so many things started happening for the other worlds. Everything felt right. And it was just so interesting that last week I listened to a podcast that I love called The Rise of the Feminine. And there was a woman on there that comes from the Celtic traditions. And she spoke of the there not being that the hierarchy of religion and Christianity that said heaven, earth, hell, was something that came about at that time when the patriarchy was really coming forward. And in actual fact, when we've been more in the time before that, and probably more in the time in the feminine and worshipping the earth as opposed to a god, it was this world and the other world. And we neither of us knew that, but for that to come into our awareness only just this week has been this beautiful culmination of Maven Woman, Liminality, and then the other world. It just, I don't know, I'd love you to speak to that and your thoughts on that.
Well, when you told me about that podcast, I've listened to one before that you mentioned, and it was just very insightful and beautiful. And I was running a retreat for some women this weekend and had a bit of time on the journey there. So I thought I'd listen to it on the way. And then I ended up listening to it on the way there, and twice on the way back, and then on the way there again the next day. And I just kept re-listening to it because it just kept giving me so much. And the first time I listened to it, it triggered me enormously, because I have Scottish ancestry, and although I was born in Ireland, I always consider myself Scottish, because I literally always told myself this story. Well, my dad was just stationed there in the RAF, so I just happened to be in Ireland when I was born. And on the podcast, they were talking about Samhain, and Samhain has always been this incredible, I've always felt this incredible pull towards that celebration, and not really ever understood it, and not really ever explored why. But what I did know was that I didn't agree with the concept of Halloween and Oh Hallows Eve. That didn't sit well with me. And the 31st of October, the date, everything around that I felt about Samhain didn't ever feel true to me. And this podcast and the way she was talking about it and what she mentioned about it really clarified a lot of that for me. Once I got over the trigger of her talking about it having the the Irish roots, because I've always considered Samhain as a Scottish festival. And one thing that came out for me in my understanding around this was that it was, of course, Celtic, and Celtic roots are both Scottish and Irish. And how interesting that I have spanned both of those in this lifetime by being born in one place and having the heritage in the other. And then it brought up this amazing connection to ancestors for me that I have been getting so much guidance on, particularly since we went out to Uluru this year and had a whole amazing process that happened out there that awakened this connection to my ancestors. And this huge realization that that I am being guided at this time to really explore my Celtic roots and to embrace it all and to stop pushing it away. And I realized, having listened to this, that in this moment, I came back from Uluru all fired up about connecting with the ancestors, and I've done nothing about it. And this just opened up this whole world of possibilities for me. And to the point where even this morning, when I'm lying in the bath, I thought, I'm going to have a bath and I'm just going to sit with this concept, and had this amazing whole process of opening up of this connection to my ancestors, which is another podcast in itself. Anyway, so that was one piece that came out of this for me, and the way that that was spoken about the other world, it made me understand that, okay, this is why we've taken on this as our name for these journeys, because it is this deep connection to land, and and the other world, and what the other world is. And I love that piece about, there's the other world and then there's the ever living world, and that just expanded so much for me as well,
The
because
living world and the ever living world.
that's right. Yes, sorry. The living world and the ever living world. That just expanded so much for me in what I've always felt as well. It sort of wrapped words around the concept that I've always felt to be true. So that was expansive. And then there was one other piece. Sorry, I'm going on a lot, but I'm just so fired up by it all. And there was a piece she mentioned about a woman that they'd had on their podcast called, I think, Yeye Louisa Tasha or something along those lines. And she talked about I'm going to try and say indigenuity. Oh gosh, can't even say the word. I can read it, but saying it is a different thing. It's indigenuity. Indigenuity, that's the word, I think. Anyway, and it really, that just really sort of caught my attention. That's why I listened to the podcast so many times. And it was about this piece of how what what that word means is, it's about people connecting to the land, and it's about people who set an intention to work with the land, and it's about the stewardship of the land at that particular time and how you create that connection. And that was the piece that really sang to me about the other world and the work that we do going out to land. And I'm still exploring that. I'm diving into her work and seeing where, if I can find more information out about it, because it just really kind of lit my heart up, that understanding of, because you and I have always felt that the other world is a bridge between the Western world and the original people of the land, who are the stewards of the land at this time and have always been the stewards of the land. And we're stepping into that. And there's this bridge that we feel we're meeting them with. And that word and that concept just kind of seemed to really land with me in my heart around that. So yeah, so much. There was so much that came out of that. And I actually don't even know if I answered the question you asked me, but there we go. That's where I'm at with it anyway.
You went into the perfect place with it. And Yeah, because this piece of there's all these bits here. There's this the ancestral part. There's the healing of our um, ancestral wounds or whatever it is that we as a family line or lineage have in us that it's my belief that we carry as as part of a lineage, a similar wound to heal, and that healing goes backward and forward in terms of through our children's children and back through our lines. So there is this feel, and I've definitely, I mean, my links around my father and mother and thinking back to through each generation, and feeling into where my land is has been this big thing that's been coming up for me because I feel so connected to the outback and to Australia. And I'm a New Zealander, and I did feel very connected to New Zealand, and I haven't lived there for so long now. I think what I feel and the confusion that I feel and not knowing where I belong is pretty much where a lot of our white culture sits in. I think a lot of our disconnect comes from this not knowing the land that our ancestors came from. And my family for generations lived in India. And I was always told that they came from France. And I think we've looked at generations of that. And yet, when one of my brothers did a DNA test, there was an extraordinary amount of um, um, Asiatic DNA, which is more that kind of India area, and so it's like, well, what's true? And I don't know what's true, so it's more what do I feel to be true? And then I'm not there, and I've never been there, and I'm fascinated with everything about India and the traditions and the goddesses. And I painted Kali, a big painting of Kali that a lot of people are connected to, and I've actually had people from India message me about it as well. So there's this pull to knowing, and there's the sense of not belonging because of this disconnect from that indigenous land, um, that we feel when we're on that land at Uluru, and the people that are there is no disconnection for them. They are that land. They haven't disconnected. And there is that real desire to have that reconnection. Um, yeah, that's what I'm sort of what's coming up for me around that.
Oh gosh, yeah. And the ancestral piece at the moment is so big. I think we're all being guided to really deepen our connection to our roots. And this feels as much an energetic process as a physical process of understanding our roots. It's almost like it's necessary for us to ground our energy in our heritage, in our ancestry, so that we can go where we need to go vibrationally. It's almost like if we don't have that sort of anchor, we can't go where we need to go within ourselves vibrationally. I hope that makes sense. That's just sort of coming through to me now, that awareness. But so I feel like a lot of people are noticing or are feeling inspired to. I know I've heard so many people around me talking about this, friends and clients talking about, wanting to explore their heritage, wanting to find out more, wanting to connect again to their roots. And it's like it's part of the reweaving of the fabric of our collective consciousness that is necessary for us to move forwards, because we have, as you said, in the Western world, we've lost a lot of that foundation that for many cultures is still in place. And so we need to find that footing for ourselves again. So I think a lot of people, it would be interesting to hear from anyone who listens to the podcast, whether they're feeling this or noticing this themselves too, or feeling called to this too. But it's something that was so strong for me at Uluru, and I just kind of almost pushed it away, because for me personally, I actually don't know very much about my heritage. And so I've always had this thing. I know you and I have talked about this now. I don't know my time of birth. So it's always been a frustration to me that I can't have my chart done by you, which would be great. I know you and you could do it for me. And like I knew very vaguely my mother's mother, and she passed away when I was very young, and I didn't know any of my other grandparents. I don't even know their names. That's how disconnected I am from my family heritage. And I think that whenever ancestors has come in, I've just almost like, oh, there's nothing there for me. I don't know. I don't understand it. And I've kind of pushed it away. And one of the things that I became aware of fairly recently, really, while we've been sitting in this liminal space, is how isolated I felt in my life. And I thought it was just that I didn't really seem to have a deep connection with my physical family in this incarnation, my brother and my sister. And I thought, no, it feels deeper than that. And I realized very recently that it's the isolation of not being connected to my ancestors. And one of the things that has come through to me today through this, process that was going on in the bath this morning was that there's this vast, I mean, beautiful, I was shown just this beautiful connection to my ancestors that is around me that I actually feel very present to in this moment because I connected to it. I consciously connected to it this morning. And I was given this beautiful visualization of my mother standing with my father's mother and how this goes through the female line with each generation, and then how that worked with me and my daughter, and how that works with my daughter and my granddaughters, and just this perception of these women standing next to each other and the healing that often needs to go on through those relationships. And I took that to a personal level of my healing with my mother-in-law, because that can often be a tricky relationship that we don't always think about that often, particularly if sort of like the marriage has ended and that relationship has ended through that ending. So there was a lot of that for me going on this morning, which was pretty big. And I think a lot of people are feeling this call to really look, particularly it feels very much like this is being driven by the feminine, but I've also was shown or made aware of this morning that that journey is also through the masculine lines as well. But the feminine seems to be leading the way with this and the healing through those relationships that just is so incredibly expansive in our collective matrix of energy.
Mm.
Wow.
Again, there's just so many little bits that come up. So I'll go with
Yeah.
wherever I go with this. I do feel both the masculine line and the feminine line in terms of the wounding or the healing. I feel um, both of those, and they're quite different in both of those lines. But I also wanted to speak to the fact that you were saying a lot of people are feeling this need to connect to ancestry and bring it back to the energy, because we had a very major shift. Anyone who listens to our podcast would remember me speaking about it, where the north and south nodes changed signs. And we've had, this is our first set of eclipses. We've had one other in Taurus, but I think it's the first set of eclipses in the new signs, and or second. But Scorpio, so the South Node moved into Scorpio, and the South Node is our karma. It's kind of what we come in with. And that's moved into the sign of transformation and real the underworld, if you'd like to say, or the other world is probably more accurate, and looking at what we've brought in as a soul. And so it's not surprising that there's been this big shift for basically the collective because of the shift of the nodes. And right now as I say, we're about to go, we've just had a new moon solar eclipse in Scorpio, and we're about to go to the full moon eclipse in Taurus on about the 8th or 9th. And I just want to give a shout out to, one of the astrologers um, who has so much more experience than me. He's been doing it for many, many, many years, and he teaches astrology, Rick Levine. I listen to him regularly, and he has just a wealth, a wealth of knowledge, and he doesn't kind of call out the energies in astrology much, but in his words, he says that this eclipse that we're coming up to is some of the biggest energies he's ever seen. Um, and it actually falls, I think, on the election day in the States. And a lot of that is because the North Node is conjunct. I think the North Node is in Taurus, and the Moon will be absolutely eclipsed with Uranus. And Uranus is that change maker, the great awakener. And so it's just got this big energy around this moment. And we've, like I've said to you before, that Saturn Uranus square and that tussle between what needs to change and where we don't want to change, and structures that are still wanting to hold on to, and Uranus being the wanting to create chaos to get the change that's needed. That happened all the way through 2021. We are in the final square now. It will be still square on this eclipse, but it's like the final stand. So in his words, what shifts now will be a permanent shift in one way or another, and in a way that we may not even be able to predict yet, because it's Uranus. And it was just like, listening to him as a man who has so many years experience in this field and has predicted so much with astrology, hearing the weight of what he's putting on this next eclipse really rings true to where we're sitting and what we're, the times that we are in. We all know whether we're, in that kind of woo-woo world or not, that we are in unprecedented times. And then to also have that that understanding of what energetically is going on in the skies as well is well, it's helpful, because you can also get okay, how do I want to work with this, as opposed to just being pushed around by it. And I think exactly what we're saying is looking at what needs to be healed in our lines, connecting with land more, working out what is really important and what we want to be doing and where we want to be putting our time. I think that's how you shift through such strong energies, is just really going internal with what is it that I can do in my world, rather than just looking at the whole world and going, it's too much. I can't do anything about it.
Yes, of course, because it always has to start there. It always has to start within us. And when we shift there, it shifts naturally in the collective, because we're all shifting around that. So when is the date of that next eclipse?
So I think it's actually I did bring it up because I did put it up on I think it's the 9th here. See,
Of November.
So Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday in Australia. I think that's sort of the 3 really important days. Obviously, eclipses last a lot longer than that. We're sitting in eclipse energy now, but because of the other things around this, like there's a few other things. Mars has gone into retrograde and will stay in retrograde, I think, for a ridiculous amount of time than he normally does in one sign, which is Gemini, which is communication. And I think Mars will be in retrograde for about 6 months. I've heard it described as Mercury retrograde on crack, because Mars is in Mercury's sign. So if you're
good.
feeling that kind of energy, then that's but yeah, so there's that piece, and Mars is squaring Neptune. There's all sorts of things coming with that as well. So there's such a lot going on at the moment. But yes, in terms of that what might shift, it's kind of like around about the 7th, 8th, and 9th of November.
Okay. Oh, well, that's something that we can all sort of pencil into our diaries, be aware of, because it feels so big. I mean, the last few months have just felt so big and deep. And the way that I've been shown it, though, and I don't know, this may be your experience, it certainly feels like it's my experience at the moment, is, whenever we go into a liminal space, I always think of the liminal space as a curve. And we go in, and when we first go into it, it feels very uncomfortable. We lose our sense of self a little bit. We kind of float about. It's not, you don't feel stuck, but you don't move forwards, and you just kind of float in this space, and it can feel really odd and uncomfortable because nothing really has, it feels, that's the best way to describe it. It's just, it's horrible. And then you sort of sit in that for a while, and you kind of get used to that, and then you start to feel this inspiration again. You start to feel like something's moving, because throughout all of that time you're integrating things, you're becoming more self-aware, you're shifting something within yourself, and then you start to sort of come out. So you start to come out, and we're just there, we're just in that starting to come out. And in this phase, what happens generally is you start to feel inspired, you start to feel the sense of movement again, or moving forward, but you're not actually doing that at the physical level yet. You're sort of feeling it, but it's not happening for you. And that can be really frustrating, especially when we're moving from the I am into the we are, because there's a lot of people, particularly people who really want to start connecting again with people, who have this strong desire, say, to call in a relationship, or they're looking for connection again. They're really feeling this intensely in their body at the moment, but nothing's changing in their worlds, nothing's happening, no one's coming in. So this can feel quite uncomfortable. But as we move through that, which is what we're doing now, we're moving up, we're moving out of the curve, and we're moving into that place of connection again. So it feels like it's coming. And it's always been shown to me as if it would be the end of this year, beginning of next year in the Akasha. That felt like, we'll be moving into reconnection then at a new level. And so that's where I feel like, for me personally, that's definitely what it feels like. I have been in such a bubble, my own little world, for such a long time. And I'm really feeling the strong desire now to meet people again and get out there and be with people. Sitting in circle at the weekend with women was just so nurturing, and just being connected again. It certainly feels as if that I'm sensing that movement within myself. So have you noticed that? Are you feeling that at all?
Yeah, well, for a start, we met for the first time
Yes.
physically since Uluru.
Yes, that was lovely.
Yeah, and no, I'm definitely feeling the call to, just be sitting in circle again with women. It's been a while. It's been since Uluru. And the interesting thing about that, just to bring it back to the energies, is Jupiter um, was in Pisces when we were at Uluru, and then moved into Aries, and is now back in Pisces now in retrograde, and will be turning direct soon. So there is this also tying in of the energy of May to now, and what you were doing in that beginning part of May with now. And we were there, we were connecting with our ancestors at Uluru, and connecting with the indigenous people. So it is this really synchronistically beautiful timing of all of this, in case we
Yes,
we always seem to do it, don't we? But
I know.
if you're wondering why we might be doing this, it's possibly that it's this link between May and now. So and
Yeah.
coincidentally, we were going to be out at Uluru now.
Yes, we were. That's true. And it's interesting, isn't it? Because with podcasts, we came into starting our podcast with this intention. We'll do it every week. It will be, regular. And we've just flowed with the energy of it. And when you're running a podcast that is kind of in flow with the energy, it's very sporadic, because we've found out. And I think I've just reached a place, if that's okay. It just, it reaches who it needs to reach when it's out. So that's good. But yes, it's an interesting time.
It sure is. And how's everything going with you? Because I know that you're moving, so that energetically is huge in terms of the land that you're on and where you're moving to.
Yeah, it's been an interesting process, and very up and down, very emotional, and feeling so called to this certain area, and I've let go, and I think the letting go of where I live now in Avalon on the northern beaches, I think that started probably a couple of years ago, and how I've been slowly letting it go ever since. And I'm now in the place where I've completely let it go, and I just want to be away. I want to be in this new place that's calling to me. And so it's a slightly uncomfortable place to be at the moment, because this is my home, and and I love it here, and yet I feel very uncomfortable here. I feel like I'm not meant to be here at the moment. So energetically, it's quite interesting. And I guess until the house is sold and everything's settled, I can't physically let go. So there's this interesting, I guess, learning around patience and trusting that it's all working out, even when it doesn't appear to be working out, which is my recent experience of it. And to just keep letting go of the need for it to be different and trusting in that process. It's massive. It's a massive move for me. It's as big for me as moving from the UK to here was 24 years ago. And kind of life changing, I think, in a lot of ways, because I'm leaving my kids and I'm leaving my grandkids, and I'm, going quite away from them. So it is big, and I don't think I'm fully through the emotions of it all yet, but it's it's just, I think the excitement of it outweighs the parts of sadness and grief that sit there around it.
Mm. It's all
Yeah.
of those things at once.
Yeah, and it's just allowing the space for it all is fine at the moment, and we'll see what happens.
Yeah, and I love that because it's a really good reminder because of these times that we're in, that so many things can be true all at once.
Yes.
So, I can equally be sitting in a really happy, joyful place, um, and also be moving through an incredible amount of um, wounding, hurt, anger, all those things. It's all true. It's not one, and we tend to kind of get blocked into one and just think that's where I'm at. And then
Yeah.
it's a nice reminder that it's not that so many things can be true at once.
Oh, absolutely. And I think that's the energy of the moment. It's the energy that we're working in at the moment and embodying. And I think that's important for us to allow all aspects of ourselves to be true in any given moment. Um, we are multifaceted, and therefore our truth is multifaceted as well.
Yes. And there was one other thing I wanted to bring up about that podcast that we were talking about in the rise of the feminine, where they talked about the other world, um, not being this. We've always kind of seen this where we maybe go after we leave our physical bodies as up, or somewhere ascending in some kind of way. And there was this way that she put this other world as as still being very earth based, because we are as souls earth based, and it just been this change, energetic change, still being here but not physically, not in our physical bodies. And I loved the concept of that. uh, it, I guess it was a moment that have always felt, but it was my mind actually really I'm getting my head around the idea that my ancestors, your ancestors, our ancestors are here. And you feel that I feel that when I'm at Uluru, because there's the people there have a real understanding of that, that the ancestors are present. And I can feel that now. And the way I can put it is, I'm like you. I was never. I actually didn't meet any of my grandparents. They were all passed well before I was born. Um, and my mum and dad were older parents. My mum was 44 and my dad was 50 when I was born. So they've both passed. And my son met my mum when he was very young, so he wouldn't have much of a memory. And my Louis, my other child, didn't meet either. But I feel them so strongly that I feel like my kids should be able to feel them. And yet, why is it that I've blocked being able to feel like I've always said I don't have grandparents. I do have grandparents. They're just not here, but they were very much and are very much present in some way. So I'm with you on that, just opening to how close that they are, how very close they are. And how present they are in our lives. I think just changing your shift and awareness around that changes a lot.
Oh, absolutely. And the thing that really I learned this morning was that you don't, I think I got in a bit of a headspace about it at some point and thought, well, I don't know their names. I can't connect to them. I don't have any history on them. I don't know where they've, all this information about them. Don't even have photographs to look at. And I think I got so caught up in that aspect of it that I closed my heart to it all. And what I learned this morning was when you open it up, you actually do not need any of that information at all. You just need to open to them and allow them to come in. And everything you need to know then comes with that. And so it is just that intention and that opening of your heart and allowing them in, inviting them in. And what I learned just this morning was that they are there around you all the time. It's us that disconnects from them. And so, what we need to do is open to that because the ancestors are there for a reason at the moment so strongly. They're really asking for that connection. And what I was shown so vividly today was the gift of healing that we can give through our ancestors, how that can ripple back through the collective energy and how that can shift the collective. If we all take that small part of ourselves and connect to our ancestors, and we see how vast that is and where it overlaps everybody else's ancestors and where we have those deep connections that have just all been fragmented in some way. And what we're doing is we're reweaving that tapestry of energy so that we can all use that as a foundation moving forward. And that was so, I guess, beautiful to witness and see and have that awareness of. And what I feel now in my body is so connected to all of that, that sense of isolation I talked about earlier on has just dissipated now. It's gone because I think, no, even if I'm sitting here on my own, not connected to my sister or anything like that, I've got that. I can tap into that, and that's vast and that's deep and that's really powerful. So, yeah, I mean, it's so exciting.
Oh, yes. And those wounds around your sister and your brother and the disconnection from your family are a part of your lineage and your line.
Well, that became very clear to me when I listened to the podcast about the third time, and something triggered this understanding. Because I've always thought, I don't even know what my wounding is, what my ancestral wounding is, because I think about my relationship with my mother. And because she died, she passed when I was 26. I was a very young woman when she passed, and I hadn't had, I guess, really deep conversations with her. We'd had some, but not enough to really, for me to view my mum as a woman rather than as my mother, and see her as a woman in her own right. And, I think I just kind of, I guess, disconnected from all of that because I didn't feel that I had an awareness. And what I realized yesterday when something was said in that podcast or something was allowed to come in, I created the space to let it come in, was that my wounding from my female line is that disconnection. It's the disconnection. You do it. It's your disconnection that has come down. And I look at, and when I got that piece of information, I looked back and I thought, oh, I know my mum disconnected from that, because we actually had conversations about it and she shut it down. She disconnected. And I have a memory of that. So I know that the disconnection is the piece that I'm healing in my lineage, which was powerful to hear.
Well, that's so interesting to me because, funnily enough, I was walking on the beach and I'd said to you, could we do the podcast a little bit later? Because I really felt the calling to go and walk.
Well, earlier, later, earlier, later.
I really needed to go for a walk and I knew it was going to rain later, but I feel like I needed to. And as I was walking on the beach, there was this wanting to, this connection ancestor. The what happened for me when I was at Uluru was this connection with my father, and him showing me where his wounding was astrologically, as in he made me look at his chart in the middle of the night, and we both have Chiron, the wounded healer, on exactly the same degree point, which is just blows my mind. It's very unusual. It's a huge coincidence given how far apart he was from when I was born. And then I thought about that and I thought, what is that wounding? I know I've got that wounding and I received this, but what is that wounding? And if I look at the two sides to my family, my dad was an orphan at 2. He lost his dad first and then his mum. So he was completely, other than his brother, I think brother and 2 sisters, he was completely alone and in an orphanage in India. And my mum lost her mum when she was 16. So there is, again, when you're talking about that disconnection, there is that orphan archetype. Even though I'm part of a huge family, I have 4 brothers and 4 sisters, I've spent 20, 30 years living away from them. Not that I don't see them, but I'm in Sydney. I'm the only family member in Sydney. It's almost like this enforced orphaning of myself, if that makes sense. And there is
Yes.
definitely this disconnection or this not belonging or this orphan archetype that's I believe my lineage too. So that's really amazing.
I think, yeah, it's interesting to hear these beautiful, some kind of synchronicity between us in respect to some things we've spoken about today, because we haven't had these conversations before. I wonder how many other people are, witnessing or observing or experiencing something similar too, because there's a definite uprising. I remember last year when we were going through another shift. I can't exactly remember which one it was, but it was one of the shifts that were pretty big last year for everyone. And there was this really strong angelic presence. And I kept feeling the angels around us. And, I was very drawn at that time to work with the angels, and never actually put anything out there to do that. But it was very strong, their presence there. And it felt very supportive, because angelic energy is always about supporting and protecting and allowing you to feel that you're not on your own as you go through something, which I think is very much what we needed in the collective at that time, because it was a very uncomfortable time. And the ancestors sitting there, this feels like the next wave of the ancestors are coming in now. They're here, they're very sort of close to us. I mean, we're on the day that most people celebrate, Samhain, today, where the veils are very thin, and that's when you can feel that connection much more strongly. I do agree with what I heard on that podcast. Actually, the true date for Samhain is between, for us here in Australia anyway, it's between the spring equinox and the summer solstice. So that date is the 7th of November, which is interesting because it's right in the middle of the eclipse time as well. That for me is the true date for Samhain. So, but we celebrate it generally around this time. And so it doesn't surprise me that there's this intense energy of the ancestors or feeling of the ancestors around us at this time. They are connecting with us for a reason. There's a desire there. They want us to connect with them. They really want us to actually reweave the fabric of that connection into our psyche. So yeah, it's just huge at the moment, I think.
And how interesting, because I hadn't even thought about the fact that today, the 31st of October,
Yeah.
until you just mentioned it. And I feel that given that we haven't had a podcast for so long and that we freakily just decided to do one today, and it happens to be that, smack bang in the middle of eclipses and on this day, that there may only just be one person that needs to listen to this and connect. And I'm sweet with
Yeah.
that being the way if that's all that's needed, but it feels very definitely like someone out there needs to hear, to open up and to that connection to the other world.
And I hope that it reaches that person. I'm sure it will. Otherwise, we wouldn't be here recording it now. But if you feel called to connect with us because this has touched you in some way, this conversation, we would love to hear from you. We would love to just hear that connection and what it means for you, either by dropping us an email, sending us, a comment, or whatever way you can connect with either of us. That would be great.
Yes, and also just before we go, we have set the dates for March for the next trip to Uluru, and we do have spaces. So if you're feeling the need to connect to land and also connect to the original people around Uluru, because we will be going on to homeland, please just find us on social media and drop us a line or send us an email, or put a message with where you're listening to this, because there's still some spaces, and we know that there are definitely people feeling the call for that connection.
I guess we can put a link into the information underneath the podcast as
Oh,
well
that's
for
perfect.
this. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Beautiful conversation as always. Thanks, Denny.
Okay, bye, Fee.